Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into something I know a lot of you have been asking for. Yep, it's time for the ultimate Etheria Restart tier list. Now, before we jump into the rankings, let's get one thing clear. We're not just slapping characters into tiers for fun. We're looking at their overall usefulness in actual team comps, across all roles, DPS, debuff, support, and sustain, and across every game mode, whether you're grinding PvE content or battling it out in PvP. So if you're wondering who's really worth investing in, you're in the right place. This list is based on a mix of personal experience, meta trends, and how well these characters synergize with others in a real match. Some might surprise you, and yeah, a few fan favorites might not rank as high as you expect. But that's the fun of it, right? Whether you're just starting out or you're already deep in the endgame, this tier list is going to help you build smarter teams and get the most out of your roster. Alright, let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking characters in Etheria Restart. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. First, let's start with damage characters. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Sybil. Alright, let's talk about Sybil, the so-called D-tier damage dealer in Etheria Restart, or as some like to call her, the defense breaker with a flair for being the least effective. Honestly, when it comes to pure numbers, Sybil is kind of the underdog who didn't quite get the memo on how to pack a punch. She can lower the enemy's defense, which sounds cool on paper, but in practice, it's like handing your opponents a slightly dented shield, rather than smashing it to bits. So if you're looking for big explosions and flashy damage, Sybil probably won't be your MVP. But hey, every team needs that quirky member who tries their best, even if they're a bit underwhelming, right? The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Andrew Odd and Andrew Reason. Now let's dive into the Andrews of Etheria Restart. Yes, there are two, and no, it's not a family reunion you want to attend. First up, Andrew Odd. He's kind of like that friend who shows up to the party but barely brings snacks. As a damage dealer, he's pretty weak, but hey, he does have some decent debuff skills that can annoy your enemies just enough to make you think, maybe he's not that useless. Still, if I were you, I'd probably just skip him and save your resources for someone who actually hits harder. Then there's Andrew Reason, who's a bit more interesting. Unlike his odd counterpart, Reason can taunt, which means he can actually pull some aggro and soak up damage for your team. That's a nice little trick to have in your pocket, especially when you want to keep your squishier characters alive a bit longer. So, while he's still not exactly the star damage dealer you dreamed of, he's definitely more useful in a pinch. Kind of like the middle child who's trying to prove they belong on the team. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Tsutomu and Oboro. Tsutomu is kind of a weird flex in the B-tier damage dealers. Sure, his damage output isn't exactly setting any records, but what he lacks in raw power, he makes up for with some slick utility moves. His Vanishing Shade skill lets him steal buffs from enemies and dispel their effects, which can totally mess with their game plan. Plus, he can shut down enemy buffs and healing, making him a solid pick if you like to play mind games. Just don't expect him to carry you in player versus player battles or the Aurora mode. He's more of a utility specialist than a straight-up damage machine. Now, Oboro is another interesting case. Her damage is pretty average, so she's not the one you want if you're chasing big numbers. But where she really shines is in stacking damage over time effects, debuffs, and delays. Basically, she's the queen of annoying your enemies slowly but surely. Oboro isn't great in PvP either, but if you're gearing up for Aurora runs or Union boss fights, she's definitely worth considering. She's like that reliable friend who might not be flashy but always gets the job done in the long haul. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Rilmocha, Victor, and Rin the Unbowed. Rilmocha is hands down the superstar you want on your team if you're jumping into Doki Doki or Terramatan battles, and she's also one of the best player versus player fighters out there. Her toolkit is a brilliant mix of crowd control, delays, and burst damage, which means she can really boss around the enemy team and keep them from doing what they want. The only catch? Take her to Aurora, and she basically turns into dead weight, so keep her far away from that mode unless you want a headache. Then we have Victor, the literal tank of the group who's tough as nails and not going down without a fight. What makes Victor really fun is that the lower his health gets, the more damage he dishes out, which turns him into a ticking time bomb you don't want to mess with. Plus, his shields keep him alive long enough to make every hit count. While he's absolutely perfect for Terramaton, he's versatile enough to fit into pretty much any other game mode, so he's definitely a safe pick if you want both durability and damage. Last but not least, Rin the Unbowed is your go-to if you want solid sustained damage, both in single target and area of effect attacks. She's pretty useful across the board, especially because her delay abilities give you some extra breathing room to control the fight. However, she's not really the MVP you'd pick for Terramaton, where burst damage and crowd control tend to steal the show. Still, for most other situations, Rin is a dependable DPS who knows how to stick around and dish out consistent pain. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Chloros, Dieting, Fangus, and Shiata. Alright, let's start with Chloros, the guy who just doesn't quit when it comes to raw sustained damage in Etheria Restart. If you want a DPS character who just keeps pounding away without missing a beat, Chloros is your go-to. Sure, he's not the team utility type who's throwing buffs and heals around, but honestly, that's not what you want him for. His damage output combined with solid debuffs makes him a beast on the battlefield. Just a heads up though, don't even think about bringing him to Doki Doki, because that mode demands quick burst damage, and Chloros prefers the long game. Next up, Dieting is an absolute monster for single target burst damage. Based on my tests, he's the best at it. If you can build a team around him that sets him up just right, he can one-shot or severely cripple the key threats on the enemy side. And in player versus player, Dieting is where the fun begins. Pulling off some insane plays with his burst damage is almost addicting. So if you love that boom gone feeling, Dieting's your guy. Now Fangus might not have the title of Queen of Damage over time like Sanya, but he's a close runner-up who dishes out excellent sustained damage. What makes Fangus stand out is the extra utility he brings to the table with his delays and follow-up attacks, giving your team more control over the flow of battle. He's not really a top pick for Doki Doki either, just like Chloros, because burst and area of effect damage are king there, but in most other modes, Fangus holds his own really well. Finally, we have Shiata, who is arguably the best area of effect sustained damage dealer in the game. If your strategy depends on wiping out groups of enemies quickly, Shiata shines bright, especially in Doki Doki and any game mode that loves AoE damage. She's not really the best for Terramaton though, where focused single target damage or burst tends to dominate. But overall, Shiata is a fantastic pick if you want consistent, wide-reaching damage that keeps the pressure on the entire enemy team. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Lian, Messiah, Rosa, Rahu, and Sanya Withered Shadow. Let's kick things off with Lian, who's basically the king of burst damage in Etheria Restart, both for single targets and area of effect. If you're diving into Terramaton or Aurora, she's an absolute powerhouse, throwing out crazy delays that help control the battlefield like a pro. Just don't expect her to dominate in Doki Doki, because that mode demands a different kind of burst, and Lian's talents shine more in sustained control and explosive moments. Then there's Messiah, a character who's basically the Swiss Army knife of the S+ tier. He applies one of the best debuffs in the game, Vulnerable, making enemies way easier to take down. Plus, he can make himself invincible, which is just chef's kiss for survivability. His blend of sustained and burst damage, both single target and area of effect, makes him a killer pick in literally every game mode. If you're into player versus player, Messiah is probably one of your best bets to flex with. Rosa is another beast in the S+ club, serving up some of the best sustained damage for both single target and area of effect attacks. What makes her stand out is the perfect combo of delay moves with buffs and debuffs, giving your team a serious tactical advantage. She's not ideal for Terramaton, so skip her there, but in all the other game modes, she's basically SSS tier, top of the food chain. Rahu brings a special kind of utility to the damage dealer role, especially if you need your DPS character to cleanse debuffs from your team. Beyond that, he's packing solid sustained damage and helpful buffs and debuffs. He's not the best pick for Aurora, but in pretty much every other mode, he's a damage machine with some clutch utility that can really turn the tide of battle. Finally, we have Sanya Withered Shadow, who might stir up some debate because her raw damage without setup isn't mind-blowing. But her damage over time synergies are next level, and every single one of her abilities plays off those DOT effects. For anyone building a DOT-focused team, Sonya is an absolute must-have. A consistent source of sustained pain that keeps grinding down enemies while your team handles the rest. Now it's time for the support characters. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Kachi. Alright, let's talk about Kachi. Honestly, this guy is kind of like that friend who shows up to the party and tries really hard, but doesn't quite steal the spotlight. He's got this Justice Beam thing that can slow down enemies, which is neat if you like a bit of crowd control. But here's the kicker. What you really want from Kachi is his stun through heroic strike ability. Because stunning your opponents sounds awesome, right? Well, outside of player versus player battles, it's not exactly game-changing. In casual modes, it feels a bit meh, like an espresso without enough caffeine. But if you're diving into PvP, suddenly Kachi becomes your secret weapon. Because that stun can turn the tide and make your enemies rage quit faster than you can say justice served. So yeah, he's not top tier everywhere, but in the right setting, Kachi shines bright enough to grab your attention. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Dorothy the Wisher and No 41. Alright, let's chat about Dorothy the Wisher first. She's like that friend who not only boosts your confidence, but also shares her snacks. Meaning she dishes out some solid damage buffs while sneaking in life leech on your allies. So your team's not just hitting harder, they're also stealing health back, which is pretty clutch. Honestly, Dorothy's a beast in almost every game mode except Doki Doki. There, she's kinda out of her league, like showing up to a pizza party with a salad. Now, flipping the script, we have No 41. She's basically Dorothy's nemesis, but in the best way possible. While Dorothy's giving your team health, No 41 is all about shutting down the enemy's healing. If Doki Doki is the battlefield, she's the MVP who keeps the opponents from bouncing back. She's like that annoying mosquito at a picnic that just won't let the enemy relax. So yeah, if you're running Doki Doki, No 41 is your go-to support character to seriously mess with the enemy's plans. The characters in this tier are in order from top left to bottom right, Turandot and Yang. Let's talk about Turandot. She's kind of like the reliable teammate who brings solid damage plus attack and defense buffs to the table. But what really makes her stand out is that accuracy boost from her Severing Blade skill, which is absolutely killer once you've leveled it up. It's like giving your team laser-guided precision shots. The catch? She's pretty useless in Doki Doki, so if you're headed there, you might want to swap her out for someone who can actually keep up. Now, Yang is a pretty sweet support choice, especially if you love a little extra firepower. He hooks your allies up with attack and critical hit buffs, but the real game changer is his cleanse ability, because who wants their team stuck with nasty debuffs? Plus, he can sneak in some off damage per second action by buffing his own critical hits, making him a sneaky threat on the field. Just a heads up though, in Terramaton mode, he's not the strongest support, so better have a backup ready for that one. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Tsukiyo Mi and Chiaki the Echo. Okay, Tsukiyo Mi is kind of like that quiet genius who doesn't shout about her skills but gets the job done like a boss. Her support abilities might not be the absolute strongest compared to the S+ tier crew, but don't let that fool you. Her silent skill is absolutely busted in player versus player battles. Seriously, she can shut down enemy abilities like nobody's business, making her one of the most feared supports in the whole Etheria Restart PvP scene. If you want to mess with your opponent's game plan, Tsukiyo Mi is your go-to. Then there's Chiaki the Echo, who's like the team's guardian angel. She's amazing everywhere except for Aurora mode. Her Ave Maria ability grants immunity to turn meter reduction and steal effects, which basically means your team keeps their turn order and resources safe from sneaky enemies trying to mess with them. Plus, she can cleanse debuffs, so she's pulling double duty as both protector and healer. Just a heads up, she's not the best pick for Aurora, so don't hesitate to swap her out there for someone better suited. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Freya, Lily, Doki Doki, and Beyond Tin. Let's start with Freya. Honestly, she's a straight-up superstar in Etheria Restart support ranks. Her Dreamwave skill automatically cleanses debuffs, which is like having a personal maid for your team's status effects, and she cranks up your defense to insane levels. You pretty much want to bring her everywhere except Aurora mode, where she doesn't quite shine as bright. Still, Freya's the kind of support that makes your team feel like they're wearing a tank suit. Now, Lily is the big boss of supports. Seriously, she's the best all-rounder you can get for thresholds, union bosses, and even player versus player battles. Her insane turn meter and speed boosts basically make your team go first and hit harder, and her Shadow Trick skill adds a juicy critical damage boost to ramp up your damage per second. Plus, she can follow up with Hat Trick, which triggers an assist attack, so she's constantly keeping the pressure on. If you want a support that can do it all, Lily is your girl. Then we've got Doki Doki. This support is a total powerhouse when it comes to buffing your team's damage and speed to ridiculous levels. In my opinion, she's the second best support in the entire game, just behind Lily. On top of those insane buffs, she can also cleanse debuffs, keeping your team in fighting shape no matter what's thrown at them. If you're looking for pure team empowerment, Doki Doki's your go-to. Last but definitely not least, Beyonton is an absolute lifesaver. Literally, she can revive your entire team, which puts her in the SSS tier category right there. Plus, she buffs attack and critical damage, so she's not just a one-trick pony. The only reason I sometimes prefer Lily or Doki Doki over her is because I like to avoid relying on revives. But let's be real, having a revive as backup is clutch for those brutal modes like Aurora or Terramaton where one wipe means starting all over. Beyonton's the ultimate safety net you want on your squad. Now let's move on to debuff characters. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Vice. Alright, let's talk about Vice, the kind of character who's designed to grab all the attention by taunting enemies and then trying to keep the team alive by slapping on debuffs, striking, and healing. Sounds cool on paper, right? But here's the catch. His whole vibe revolves around this taunt then sustain playstyle, which honestly doesn't bring much real debuff utility to the table. He's that guy who tries to heal his teammates with strike and heal, but half the time he's barely hanging on himself and can't dish out a reliable heal. So yeah, he's a bit like the friend who insists on playing goalie but keeps falling over. Noble effort, but not exactly winning you the game. In Etheria Restart, when it comes to debuff specialists, Vice definitely lands in the D tier for bringing more struggle than swagger. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Ashu. Okay, let's chat about Ashu. This character is like that unpredictable wildcard who throws a bit of everything at you. Speed debuffs, damage over time effects, and even silence. Sounds like a lot of tools, but honestly, it's like he's trying to juggle way too many things without really mastering any. I usually vibe better with debuff characters who focus on one or two solid specialties, you know? Ashu's kind of all over the place, which makes him feel a bit scattered and less reliable in those clutch moments. So in Etheria Restart's debuff lineup, he's cruising comfortably in the C tier. Not bad, but definitely not stealing the spotlight either. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Kazami Kazuyo and RC77. Let's talk Kazami Kazuyo. She might not be the absolute top-tier debuff queen, but she definitely brings some solid utility to the table. What makes her stand out is her ability to dispel buffs from enemies, which is a game changer especially against bosses like Aurora and Terramaton who love to stack those annoying buffs. On top of that, she slows down enemy speed while speeding up her own team, so she's all about controlling the flow of battle. She's reliable, practical, and a nice middle ground choice when you need some solid debuff support without going full overkill. Now, RC77 is another solid contender in the B tier, thanks to his blend of stuns and debuffs. The real MVP move here is his complete overwrite skill, which not only stuns enemies but also slashes their defense and attack stats. Pretty nasty combo if you ask me. Plus, he's got that anomalous onslaught move that messes with the enemy's turn meter, delaying their action and giving your team the edge. So yeah, RC77 might not be flashy like some top-tier debuffers, but his versatile toolkit makes him a dependable pick for holding down the fort. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Selene, Kachi the Guard, and Lilith. Alright, starting with Selene. I gotta admit, she might actually deserve a spot higher than A tier, but I haven't had enough hands-on time with her during testing to fully commit. She's rocking this weird mix of damage over time effects, kind of like Obol, but doesn't quite hit the same level of impact. What really makes her shine, though, is her silence skill, which I found super clutch in player versus player battles. So if you're looking to shut down enemy skills fast, Selene is definitely a solid pick. Then there's Kachi the Guard, who's basically the Swiss Army knife of debuffers. He's great across pretty much every game mode, thanks to his ability to debuff critical hit rate and slow enemy speed with Brave Charge, which also acts as a fantastic delay skill. But honestly, What I love most about Kachi is his area of effect defense buff. Sometimes he feels more like a support hero than just a debuffer. Plus, his Steadfast Dreamer skill can block debuffs and delays on allies, which is clutch when you need to keep your team steady under pressure. Last but definitely not least is Lilith, my personal favorite in the A-tier lineup. While she's not quite on the power level of the S-tier legends, she packs a punch with a wild mix of debuffs and damage procs that keep fights interesting. She can stun enemies with not one, but two different skills, which adds a lot of control to her kit. And don't forget about her courteous gesture move. It has a chance to give her an extra turn, which can totally turn the tide when the battle's hanging by a thread. Lilith is just a blast to use, and she nails that perfect balance between offense and disruption. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Kazuya the Reverie, Veronica, Kraken, Obel, and Viper. Alright, let's dive into the S-tier debuff legends, starting with Kazuya the Reverie. Now, she probably shouldn't be an S-tier if you're judging by pure stats alone, but here's the thing. She absolutely obliterates the Doki Doki threshold thanks to her Slumber debuff, and if you've faced Doki Doki, you know how insanely annoying that boss can be. For pretty much every other threshold and union boss fight, she's decent, but not mind-blowing, though her Sink and Void skill with that attack debuff isn't too shabby. She's also a killer pick for player versus player, where her utility really shines. Next up is Veronica, who is basically the Dream Support debuffer hybrid. You want her for two main reasons. First, she has a fantastic mix of attack debuffs that really weaken enemies, and second, her shields can save your team's bacon more times than you'd expect. Her Spirit Circle skill is pure gold. It drops your whole team to 1 hit point, but keeps them alive no matter what damage they take after that. Talk about clutch. If you're looking for survivability plus offense, Veronica is the one. Then there's Kraken, who is one of the best crowd control beasts in the debuff category. His personalized service ability applies Deep Frozen, which disables enemy actions, basically freezing them out of the fight. Plus, his freeze debuff stops enemies from gaining turn meter, making him a delay specialist extraordinaire. While these delay effects don't work wonders against bosses like Aurora, Terrormaton, or the Union bosses, Kraken shines bright in the Doki Doki threshold and especially in PvP, where delaying enemy turns can win games. Obel is the go-to guy for damage over time effects that scale with enemy health, which makes him a monster against Aurora and in PvP battles. He kind of doubles as a secondary damage dealer because those damage over time effects can really pile up. On top of that, he's got an area of effect stun with his Shadow Wave skill, keeping enemies locked down while chipping away their health. So, he's that perfect mix of damage and disruption in one package. Last but definitely not least, we have Viper, who's a little quirky to play but incredibly rewarding once you get the hang of him. His bread and butter is stacking Savage Fang, which then triggers Scale Slash, a skill that cleanses buffs from enemies while reducing their attack and speed. That combo is just nasty for controlling fights. Unlike a lot of the S-tier debuffers who might feel niche, Viper's super flexible and you can bring him into almost any situation without worrying too much. He's like the Swiss Army knife of S-tier debuffers, versatile, effective, and definitely a favorite for a reason. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Heinrich, Klaus, Dinah, Gray, and Marvell. Let's jump straight into the S+ tier, where the absolute heavy hitters of the debuff world live, starting with Heinrich. This guy is basically a nightmare for your enemies because he can completely disable their buffs and healing, shutting down entire fights before they even get started. On top of that, his farewell shot ramps up critical damage taken and boosts the enemy's critical chance, making them even more fragile to your burst damage. If you want to maximize your DPS, Heinrich is your go-to guy. Your damage dealers will thank you, especially those who love to hit hard and fast. He's solid across every game mode, no exceptions. Next up is Klaus, who's basically Heinrich's equal in many ways. She shines by increasing the damage enemies take while simultaneously reducing their own damage output. A double whammy that makes fights much easier. Plus, her formatting skill lowers enemy defense and speed, which not only weakens them but also delays their turns. She's a beast in nearly every game mode except Aurora, where she's just a bit less effective. Still, Klaus is a fantastic all-rounder who pairs well with any team looking to dominate through debuffs. Dinah brings an amazing balance to the table with her mix of enemy turn delays and team turn advances. Her Blade Torrent skill boosts your team's turn meter, so you're hitting faster while slowing down the opposition. She also amps up enemy damage taken by applying defense reduction and vulnerable, making her kind of like a one-woman wrecking crew, similar to Messiah. Dinah is great everywhere except the Doki Doki threshold, where she falls just a bit short. If you want that perfect mix of speed control and debuff damage, she's your gal. Gray is a monster when it comes to defense reduction, packing one of the strongest AoE defense debuffs in the game with lightning speed, which lasts for multiple turns. On top of that, he boosts your team's critical rate, making him perfect for burst damage compositions or even sustained damage teams. Basically, if you can capitalize on his 2-turn lightning speed window, you'll be wiping enemies off the board faster than you can blink. And last but definitely not least, Marvell, who's just plain marvelous for 2 key reasons. First, he can silence enemies, which is pretty rare and incredibly valuable in PvP to shut down those clutch skills. Second, he's a master of delaying enemies by slowing their speed and even stealing their turn meter. That combination makes him a nightmare to deal with and a huge asset when you want to control the battlefield. If you want a debuffer who can disrupt and control like a pro, Marvell's your man. Finally, let's move on to healer, sustain characters. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Dorothy and Rin. Alright, let's talk about some of those solid but not quite top tier healers in Etheria Restart. The B tier crew who still pull their weight, but maybe don't get the spotlight like the big heal bosses. First up, Dorothy. Now, Dorothy is like that reliable friend who shows up with snacks and a first aid kit. She's got great single target healing and can heal the entire team as well. Plus, she brings a full cleanse for one ally, which is clutch for getting rid of nasty debuffs. Sure, Chiaki might edge her out a bit because Chiaki can reduce damage on top of healing, but Dorothy's healing numbers on average are a bit stronger, so she's definitely no slouch. She's that steady lifeline you want in your corner when the battle gets messy. Now, Rin takes a bit of a different approach. She swaps out traditional healing for shields that protect the whole team. Think of her like the friend who throws a blanket over you during a zombie apocalypse, while also poking the zombies to keep their attention. Rin's playstyle revolves around taunting enemies and buffing your team's defense to soak up more damage. This makes her pretty handy against big threats like Terramaton, Union bosses, and Aurora. But here's the catch. On Doki Doki mode, where you really want pure healing for sustained fights, Rin isn't the MVP. She's more of a tanky support than a classic healer, so if you're after that non-stop health regen vibe, she might not be your go-to. Still, she's got her moments and can definitely keep your team standing when things get rough. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Chiaki. Let's shine a spotlight on Chiaki, one of those A-tier healers who's not just patching up wounds, but actually making sure you don't get hit so hard in the first place. Her healing is solid, nothing too flashy, but definitely dependable. But what really sets her apart are those origami guardians that reduce damage taken by your team. It's like having a little squad of paper samurais shielding you from pain. This makes her a fantastic pick for pretty much every game mode in Etheria Restart, except for that tricky Doki Doki threshold mode, where pure healing power usually steals the show. So if you want a healer who's part medic, part damage buffer, Chiaki's got your back. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Mia and Sonya. If you're looking to talk about healers who basically carry the team on their back, Mia is absolutely that can't-go-wrong pick. She dishes out a ton of heals and shields, so your team is basically wrapped in a protective bubble of goodness. But honestly, the real star of her kit is her debuff cleanse called Cascade. Nothing ruins your day faster than getting hit with those nasty status effects, and Mia just wipes them clean like a pro. Now, sure, on Aurora mode you might not feel her full power since you don't really need that cleanse as much, but everywhere else, she's basically a healing superstar. Then there's Sonya, who's the ultimate flexible healer that adapts to whatever the battle throws at you. Want solid healing? She's got you covered. Need a clutch revive? Her Forest Heart skill can bring a teammate back to life, though it does come with a longer cooldown, so you have to use it wisely. But wait, there's more. Sonya's got a neat trick called Twine Dance, which helps her keep her turn meter up. That means she can jump in and act before the bad stuff lands on your team, giving you a huge tactical advantage. Pretty slick, right? Now, just like Mia, Sonya isn't really your go-to for Aurora mode since revives aren't as necessary there. But for pretty much every other mode, she's a must-have. Whether you need non-stop healing, a second chance for a fallen ally, or just someone who can keep the team alive with smart timing, Sonya brings a little bit of everything to the table. So if you want an all-rounder healer who plays smart, she's the one to pick. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Hellkid, Lingluo, and Valerian. Alright, if we're talking about the absolute cream of the crop in Etheria Restart healers, Hellkid is one of those rare gems who doubles as a damage dealer and a tanky support. He's got this short barrier that you want to keep up at all times because it supercharges his other skills, making him a total beast on the battlefield. Plus, he can stun enemies and debuff their attack, which means he's not just healing, he's actively controlling the fight. Definitely an off-DPS unit who's way more than just a healer. Then there's Lingluo, the undisputed queen of healing in Etheria Restart. Seriously, if you want the best sustain and the most reliable cleanse for your team, Lingluo is your girl. She shines in pretty much every mode, keeping your squad alive and kicking while wiping away any nasty debuffs that try to slow you down. The only exception is Terramaton mode, where her skills don't have as much impact, but everywhere else, she's a must-have, no questions asked. Valerian is another top-tier healer who brings a slightly different flavor to the table. Instead of big burst heals, she focuses on steady, minor heals combined with damage immunity and shields, which is super clutch for keeping your team safe over longer fights. She's a solid pick in every game mode and serves as a fantastic alternative to Lingluo if you want to mix things up. Plus, she's got some crowd control in her kit with Slumber, which puts enemies to sleep and gives your team a breather. So basically, when you're aiming for the absolute best healers in the game, these three are the ones you want on your radar. Hellkid for his hybrid damage and control, Lingluo for pure healing supremacy, and Valerian for steady protection with some crowd control flair. Pick any of them and you'll notice your team lasting way longer in battle. That's just how strong these S+ tier healers are. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.